Systematic reviews, grant proposals, curriculum development. Every researcher's workflow is different, and now for the first time, you can automate and customize yours with Consensus and Claude. Consensus is already the best place to start your research. You can ask a question, search through over 220 million peer-reviewed research papers, and see what the literature says. But sometimes you need more control and customization. That's where the Consensus MCP comes in. It lets you build out powerful workflows in Claude and use the Consensus Search API to actually search through the literature and provide that information back, allowing you to build highly customized workflows for any part of your research pipeline. In this video, we're going to walk through every part of this to help you get set up. We're going to add Consensus to Claude, and then we're going to walk through 3 different workflows: curriculum development, helping with a systematic review, and writing and researching a grant proposal. So now that we're in Claude, you're going to want to go to the plus sign here, and we're going to attach a connector. So when you go to connector, click on Manage Connectors, plus Browse, and this is where you can find new connectors to add. So let's search Consensus, and you can see I've got one here. We're going to go ahead and hit Connect. Now, when this happens, you're going to see an authentication screen pop up that will allow you to connect your Consensus account to the Consensus connector in Claude. This is going to give you full search results when you're actually doing searches in Claude. If you don't connect your account, you're only going to get the top 3 out of 20 papers. So you want to make sure that you do that. Let's go ahead and run a test. What does the research say on caffeine and dementia? Now, when I send this to Claude, you'll see that it's actually going to be able to use the Consensus app to run the query. Now, this reaches out to Consensus, it sends a search query, and then it returns the top 20 results as well as all their abstract and metadata back to Claude to be able to summarize. So you can see here, if I open up where it says Loaded Tools, I can see that it used Consensus here. It sent a query, and it received back 20 papers, and it gives you the title, the abstracts, the metadata of all of those papers that Claude is able to work with. Now, this is just a basic example, and if we're doing a search like this, it makes more sense to do it in Consensus. But once we start combining the fact that you can do a search in Consensus with a lot of the powerful capabilities and planning of Claude, we get some really cool examples. And to do that, we're going to use something in Claude called Skills, and we're going to use a part of the Claude desktop app called Cowork, which is able to create a to-do list and execute longer running plans. Now we're going to go through those 3 use cases that we talked about, starting with curriculum development. So in Claude, if I go over here to Cowork, and if I open up the sidebar here, you'll see a little Customize tab. Now, if I click on that, you'll see a section for skills. Now, a skill is just like a set of instructions for Claude. It's going to give it some context and a very strict set of rules that it's going to go through to be able to create an output. In this example, I've got 3 skills that we're going to be using, and I'm actually going to put those skills down in the description below so you can access them and actually import them into Claude. The first one that we're going to be using is called the recommended reading list. Now, this is really useful if you are a professor or a teaching faculty and you have a course and you want to find up-to-date recommended readings for that course. And so in this case, you can see over here, this skill takes a course syllabus. It breaks down the core learning outcomes as well as the topics each week. And then for each week, it runs a search in Consensus, finds papers that have been published in the last year, and then creates a doc for you outlining for each topic that we're going through or each week of the course, what are recommended readings for students. So let's go ahead and actually run that. So back in Cowork here, I'm going to go ahead and upload my course outline. So I've got one here for a biochemistry class looking at the impact of molecular genetics on human cancer. So I've asked it, can you generate a reading list for this course? And so what it's doing is it's taking the syllabus, it's breaking it down into those core parts, so learning outcomes and topics. And then for each topic, it's looking up recommended papers in Consensus that have been published in the last year. Once it receives those, it's going to put together a full doc outlining each week the recommended papers, a summary of the papers, and a discussion question that students can think about as they're reading it and how it relates back to the topic you're teaching. You can see here, it's actually created a full doc for me outlining the course learning outcomes. And then for each topic, so weeks 1 and 2, I get 3 papers. So here's a paper on advances in oncogene and tumor suppressing gene research. It's got a summary of the research, and then it's actually got a discussion question that relates this topic or this paper back to the topic that I'm teaching. So this is a great way for students to be able to read recent research and understand how the information that they're learning actually applies to research happening today. Now we're going to hop to use case 2. And in this one, we're going to use a skill called Literature Review Helper. This skill basically acts as a research assistant for you when you're starting a lit review. So very briefly, it helps you get a sense of where the literature sits, different keywords that you should be running, and gives you an outline of the core different subtopics within the area you're researching. But I'm going to explain this in more detail as we actually let the skill run. So let's go ahead back to Claude here, and I'm going to paste in this question. Hey, I'm starting a literature review on how caffeine relates to or impacts dementia. Can you outline some initial areas for me to explore? Now, when I run this, the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to run that query in consensus and return 20 papers to Claude. Then Claude is going to read through those papers, and once it gets an understanding of generally what the research says on this topic, it's going to go ahead and break that down into different sub-questions using the PICO framework that it can then further analyze. It's going to ask you for confirmation, like it's doing here. I'm going to say, yes, go ahead. And it's going to now generate its own subqueries to explore each of these different subtopics. Once it's done that, it's going to process all that information into a document like we showed before, but this one is going to be a kickoff for your systematic review. As you can see here, it's giving you an overview of the different framework and the sub-questions that it asked. It's also looking at, for each sub-question, generally what does the research say, and then how can you continue your research with recommended keywords, Boolean pairs, or different topics that you should be thinking about looking into. And it's done this for each one of the different subtopics that it's identified. Now, this is a great way to be able to kick off a systematic review and give you a sense of what you should be asking when you're doing research on different tools. And you can pair this back in with consensus because every single paper that it's linked here is linked to consensus. So you're able to go back, dig more in, and ask more questions. Now, the third use case we're going to show is the most complex one because it's using both consensus and a couple public APIs. And that is the consensus grant researcher. If you're a researcher, you know that the entire world revolves around finding and applying for grants. And so this skill makes it a bit easier. What it does is it takes your topic, it's going to use consensus to be able to identify novel areas, so areas where there are maybe gaps within the research for your topic to recommend where you might be able to cater your research for a grant. And then it's actually going to go and look through the NIH. It's going to find grants that are available. It's going to find recently funded projects, and it's going to present that all to you in a report. So let's go ahead and actually run a query to see how this works. So we're going to go back into Cowork here, and I'm going to say, hey, I'm building a multi-center clinical prediction rule to help emergency doctors decide when to test and treat neonates for HSV. Now, this is an actual real grant application from someone that I was working with recently. Now, what it's doing is it's doing a couple different stages. The first one is that it's doing a novelty review. Now, this is where it's using consensus quite a bit. It takes your initial proposal or what you want to do research on. It determines a number of subtopics or queries to run in consensus to understand where there might be gaps in the literature. Once it's done that, it actually proposes a narrower version of what you're thinking about for your research project that directly addresses gaps in the research that other researchers have identified. Once it's done that, it moves forward to the next stage where it actively starts looking for open grants. So in this case, it works backwards to determine which sub-agencies within the NIH or other associated agencies actually might relate to the topic that you're looking at, what grants are available. It'll look at NIH Reporter to be able to determine other projects that have already received grant funding that might be similar. And then from there, it actually looks and sees what grants are open or what announcements have been made about funding in those areas, and puts together a report for you that outlines all of these so you can get started in understanding where you might want to look for and actually applying for a grant. And finally, after all of this, it was able to process a PDF. So let's go ahead and open this to see what it was able to output. So we've opened up the PDF that Claude provided us, and you can see that it's structured pretty well. So the first page here is giving us an executive summary of what it's looking at. Then if we actually dive into the report, it's giving us an overview of the research landscape. So this is where it looked in consensus to try and find where there was information that was novel within what we were doing. As you can see here, it was able to even look at the papers and identify where researchers have specifically said there is research missing or where research needs to be done to be able to advance some of the things they were working on. And then finally, it's giving me a pretty healthy breakdown of projects that are similar, that it's funded, that we can potentially base this off of. And so I can see here that all of the funded projects in HSV are not about building a prediction rule, but there are other funded projects that have done something similar for other diseases. So this is a really good way to be able to start off with your grant research. And one of the benefits with this is it's really easy to be able to further customize skills in Claude. And so my recommendation is to get started, connect consensus to Claude, try out a couple searches to make sure it works, and then go ahead and import these skills and use them as a base for you to build on top of. So take the grant one, for example, and use Claude to edit it to come out with something that's really highly customized to your workflow. Maybe you're looking at different funding institutions, or maybe you actually have a very specific process of how you look for grants. But these are just examples of how you can combine the power of consensus search with a lot of the AI tools that you're using today to build highly customized workflows for researchers. If you want to learn more, make sure that you subscribe to this channel. We're going to be putting out more videos that go into more depth on each of these. And we're also doing a webinar that we may have the recording for already on specifically building and using some of these skills. So stay connected, let us know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.